Sophia's apartment was a sanctuary of modernity, its clean lines and neutral tones reflecting her meticulously curated life. The soft glow of the floor lamp cast warm shadows across the living room, where she sat cross-legged on the plush velvet couch. Her laptop rested on the coffee table, its screen illuminating her face as she scrolled through the streaming site. It had been one of those days. Endless meetings, frustrating clients, and a creeping sense of loneliness that no amount of work could dispel. Tonight, she decided, she would indulge in something purely for herself. Her fingertips hesitated over the keyboard as she typed in the search bar, Le Désir Caché. The film had been recommended by a friend, described as a masterclass in sensuality rather than outright explicitness. Sophia had never been one for graphic content, but the promise of artful intimacy intrigued her. She clicked play, the screen filling with soft, diffused light and the faint sound of whispering in French. The opening scene was a close-up of a woman's hand trailing over silk sheets, the fabric catching the light in subtle ripples. Sophia felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth spreading through her as she leaned back against the cushions. She told herself this was harmless, a private escape from the demands of her life. Her body responded almost instinctively, a faint ache settling low in her abdomen. Her breath came a little quicker, her skin tingling with anticipation as the scene unfolded. The woman on screen, a brunette with sharp cheekbones and a confident gaze, locked eyes with her lover across a dimly lit room. Sophia's pulse quickened as the camera lingered on their hands brushing, the tension between them palpable even through the screen. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, her lips parting slightly as she became absorbed in the moment. It was then that she heard the sound, a faint creak of the door handle turning. Her heart leapt into her throat, her body freezing as the door swung open. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the hallway. He was dressed in a loose hoodie and jeans, his dark hair messy from running his hands through it. His eyes, so much like her own, widened as they took in the scene before him, his mother, her face flushed, and the unmistakable images on the screen. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Sophia's hand shot out to close the laptop, but it was too late. The sound, soft moans, whispered French, lingered in the air, filling the room with an awkward tension. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Sophia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her body felt heavy, her limbs tingling with a mix of shock and mortification. She could feel the heat spreading from her cheeks down her neck, her chest tightening as she struggled to find something, anything, to say. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, his brows furrowing as he processed what he'd just walked into. His gaze flicked from the laptop to Sophia, his jaw tightening as he took a step back. I didn't," Sophia began, her voice trembling, but Ethan cut her off. "Forget it," he snapped, his tone laced with anger and something else she couldn't quite place. Disgust? Hurt? He turned on his heel, slamming the door shut behind him with a force that made the walls shudder. Sophia sat frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Her heart raced, her palms damp as she stared at the closed door. She could still see the look on Ethan's face, the way his eyes had darkened with betrayal. The warmth she'd felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, gnawing guilt. She glanced at the laptop, now closed, its screen dark. The room felt smaller somehow, the air thicker, as though the walls were closing in around her. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as she tried to steady her breathing. What had she done? The question looped in her mind, each repetition more accusatory than the last. She was his mother, the one who was supposed to set the example, to protect him from the messiness of the adult world. And yet, here she was, caught in a moment of vulnerability that now felt like an unforgivable lapse in judgment. Her gaze drifted to the door, where Ethan's shadow lingered for a moment before disappearing down the hallway. She wanted to call out to him, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say? The apartment was silent again, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional beep of a car alarm from the street below. Sophia slumped back against the couch, her body heavy with exhaustion and regret. The evening had started as a small act of self-indulgence, a moment to reclaim her own desires. Now, it felt like a turning point, a crack in the foundation of her carefully constructed world. She closed her eyes. The image of Ethan's face burned into her mind. How could she face him tomorrow? How could she look him in the eye, knowing what he'd seen? The question swirled in her head, unanswered and unanswerable. For now, all she could do was sit in the silence, alone with her thoughts and the weight of her mistakes. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of the kitchen, casting a soft, golden glow over the room. Sophia stood at the counter, her movements mechanical as she sliced an avocado in half. The creamy flesh was ripe, its texture smooth under the blade of her knife, but her hands trembled slightly as she spread it over the toast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, its rich aroma usually comforting, but today it did little to ease the tension coiled in her chest. She glanced at the clock on the oven. 8:15. Ethan would be up soon. The thought made her stomach churn, her heart skipping a beat as she recalled the previous night's events. The slamming of the door still echoed in her mind, the weight of Ethan's anger and disgust pressing down on her like a physical force. She heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway, and her body tensed instinctively. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He was dressed in a gray hoodie and loose-fitting joggers, his dark hair tousled from sleep. His expression was guarded, his jaw set as he avoided her gaze. "Good morning," Sophia said, her voice softer than usual, laced with a tentative apology. Ethan didn't respond. He moved to the coffee machine, pouring himself a cup with deliberate movements. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, until Sophia couldn't take it anymore. "About last night?" she began, her voice wavering slightly. Ethan turned sharply, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were hard, almost accusing, and Sophia felt a sharp pang of guilt in her chest. "Let's not," he interrupted, his tone cutting. He took a sip of his coffee, his hand steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the mug. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She set down the knife, her palms damp against the cool granite countertop. "Ethan, I know what you saw, and I understand why you're upset, but I'm human too. I have needs, desires, things I don't usually let you see." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them almost tangible. Ethan's expression shifted, a flicker of something, confusion, anger, crossing his face. He set the mug down with a thud, the sound making Sophia flinch. "You're my mom," he said, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "You're not supposed to, I don't know, act like that." Sophia's chest tightened, her heart aching at the honesty in his voice. She took a step toward him, her hands extended in a gesture of vulnerability. "I know it's hard to see me that way. I'm your mother, but I'm also a woman. I'm not perfect, Ethan. I make mistakes. I have moments of weakness." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "Weakness? Is that what you call it? Watching that kind of stuff where anyone could walk in?" Sophia winced at the accusation, her cheeks flushing with shame. "It wasn't like that. I thought I was alone. I didn't expect you to come in." Ethan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, you should have locked the door." The words stung, but Sophia forced herself to stay calm. She took another step closer, her voice soft but steady. "You're right. I should have. And I'm sorry for that. But I'm not sorry for being human, for needing something just for myself, even if it's messy or imperfect." Ethan looked away, his gaze fixed on the floor. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. Sophia could see the conflict in his eyes, the way he struggled to reconcile the image of her as his mother with the woman he'd seen last night. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "If you're so comfortable with it, why don't we watch one together after dinner?" Sophia froze, her breath catching in her throat. The words hung in the air, their implications sinking in slowly. Her pulse quickened, a mix of shock and unease settling in her chest. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "You said it's normal, right? So why not?" Sophia's mind raced, trying to process what he was asking. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in around them. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Ethan turned away, picking up his mug and heading toward the living room. "Think about it," he said over his shoulder, his tone casual, as though he hadn't just dropped a bombshell. Sophia stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of his words settled over her, leaving her feeling exposed, vulnerable. She glanced down at the avocado toast she'd prepared, her appetite gone. The kitchen was quiet again, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Sophia sank into a chair, her body heavy with exhaustion and confusion. She didn't know how to respond, how to navigate this uncharted territory. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly lost. The apartment was unnervingly quiet as Sophia stood in the kitchen, her hands moving methodically over the ingredients for dinner. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air as she chopped vegetables, her cuts precise but mechanical. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation from that morning. Ethan's request, spoken so casually yet loaded with implications, loomed over her like a storm cloud, dark and inescapable. She glanced at the clock. 7:30. Ethan would be home soon. Her stomach twisted at the thought, her fingers tightening around the knife handle. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the tension in her body refused to ease. The sound of the front door opening made her jump, her heart racing as she heard Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his gym bag slung over one shoulder. He looked at her briefly, his expression unreadable, before setting the bag down and moving to the sink to wash his hands. "Dinner's almost ready," Sophia said, her voice soft but steady. Ethan nodded, drying his hands on a towel. "Smells good." They moved around each other in silence, the air thick with tension. Sophia set the roasted chicken and vegetables on the table, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the plates. Ethan poured himself a glass of water, his movements deliberate, his eyes avoiding hers. They sat down to eat, the clinking of cutlery the only sound in the room. Sophia took small bites, her appetite non-existent, her stomach tied in knots. She could feel Ethan's gaze on her occasionally, his eyes lingering for a moment before flicking away. Finally, she couldn't take the silence anymore. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice breaking the stillness. Ethan shrugged, stabbing a piece of chicken with his fork. "Fine." Sophia nodded, her throat tight. She glanced at the bottle of red wine she'd opened earlier, an impulse decision she now regretted. Or maybe it was exactly what they needed. "Want some wine?" she asked, gesturing to the bottle. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." She poured them each a glass, the deep red liquid catching the light as it filled the glasses. She handed one to Ethan, her fingers brushing his briefly, the contact sending a jolt through her. They clinked glasses, the sound hollow in the quiet room. The wine was rich and full-bodied, its warmth spreading through Sophia as she took a sip. She could feel it loosening the tension in her body, easing the tightness in her chest. Ethan drank his glass quickly, refilling it almost immediately. By the time they finished eating, the bottle was half empty, and the silence between them had shifted, becoming less tense, more charged. Sophia cleared the table, her movements slower now, her body relaxed from the wine. Ethan stood, stretching his arms over his head, his hoodie riding up to reveal a sliver of toned stomach. Sophia's gaze lingered for a moment before she looked away, her cheeks flushing. "So," Ethan said, his voice casual, "are we doing this?" Sophia froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned to look at him, her mind racing. "Doing what?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Watching a movie, like we talked about." Sophia's pulse quickened, her palms damp as she nodded slowly. "Okay." They moved to the living room, the soft glow of the floor lamp casting warm shadows across the room. Ethan grabbed the remote, sinking into the couch as he pulled up a streaming site. Sophia sat beside him, her body tense, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The screen lit up, showcasing rows of thumbnails, suggestive images and provocative titles. Sophia's cheeks burned as she glanced at Ethan, but his expression was unreadable, his focus on the screen. "What are you in the mood for?" he asked, his tone casual, as though they were choosing a regular movie. Sophia hesitated, her throat dry. "I don't know. Something tasteful?" Ethan chuckled, a low sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Tasteful, huh?" He began scrolling through categories. Romantic, fetish, BDSM. Sophia's heart raced as she watched the images flash by, her body reacting instinctively to the suggestive content. "What about this one?" Ethan asked, pointing to a thumbnail of a young woman in lingerie. Sophia shook her head. "Too obvious." Ethan scrolled further, stopping at a category labeled stepfamily. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as he clicked on it, the screen filling with thumbnails of women in suggestive positions, their expressions a mix of innocence and allure. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, his voice low, almost teasing. Sophia's pulse quickened, her body responding to the tension in the air. She glanced at Ethan, her throat tight. "Which one?" He selected a film titled The Stepfamily Affair, the thumbnail showing a young stepmother and her stepson in a heated embrace. Sophia's heart pounded as he clicked play, the screen going dark before the opening scene began. The room was filled with the soft hum of the laptop fan, the tension between them palpable. Sophia could feel Ethan's body heat, his presence overwhelming as they sat side by side, the screen casting a faint glow on their faces. The movie began. The opening scene a close-up of the stepmother's face, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and hesitation. Sophia's breath quickened, her body reacting to the intimacy on screen. Ethan leaned back, his arm resting on the back of the couch, his fingers brushing against Sophia's shoulder. She felt a jolt of electricity at the contact, her heart racing as she glanced at him. His eyes were fixed on the screen, his expression unreadable, but she could feel the tension in his body, the way his breathing had quickened slightly. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the warmth of the wine and the intimacy of the moment were overwhelming. This was uncharted territory, and she had no idea where it would lead. The stepmother, a woman with honey blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. Her robe hung loosely around her shoulders, revealing the curve of her body beneath the thin fabric. The camera lingered on her hands as she untied the sash, the robe slipping to the floor in a slow, deliberate motion. Sophia's breath hitched, her body reacting instinctively to the raw sensuality on display. She could feel the warmth spreading through her, a faint ache settling low in her abdomen. She glanced at Ethan out of the corner of her eye, her pulse quickening as she noticed the way he leaned forward slightly, his attention fixed on the screen. The stepson entered the room, his tall frame and broad shoulders commanding attention. His shirt was unbuttoned, revealing a glimpse of his toned chest as he approached his stepmother. The tension between them was palpable, their eyes locked in a heated exchange that left no doubt about their intentions. Sophia shifted uncomfortably on the couch, her body tingling with a mix of arousal and unease. She could feel the weight of Ethan's presence beside her, the heat radiating from his body making her skin prickle. She crossed her legs, trying to distract herself, but the movement only drew attention to the growing tension between them. The scene on the screen intensified, the stepmother's hands trailing over her stepson's chest as she whispered something in his ear. Ethan's breathing quickened slightly, his fingers tapping restlessly on the arm of the couch. Sophia noticed the way his jeans tightened slightly in his lap, the faint outline of his arousal unmistakable. Her cheeks burned, her heart racing as she struggled to process the situation. She couldn't deny the electricity in the air, the unspoken tension that hung between them like a heavy curtain. Ethan shifted in his seat, his leg brushing against hers briefly. The contact sent a jolt through her body reacting before her mind could catch up. She glanced at him again, her gaze lingering on his profile, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly as he exhaled. "So," she began, her voice low and teasing, "you seem interested." Ethan's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment he said nothing, his gaze searching hers as though trying to gauge her intentions. Sophia smirked, unable to resist the pull of the moment. She leaned back against the couch, her posture relaxed but her body thrumming with anticipation. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice dripping with innuendo. "Everyone has their preferences." Ethan's cheeks flushed, but he didn't look away. Instead, he raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Is that so?" Sophia nodded, her gaze dropping briefly to his lap before meeting his eyes again. "You're not exactly hiding it." Ethan chuckled, a low, almost nervous sound that sent a shiver down her spine. He leaned back, his arm resting on the back of the couch as he turned slightly toward her. "Maybe I'm just curious." Sophia's pulse quickened, her body responding to the challenge in his voice. She reached out, her hand brushing against his on the arm of the couch. The contact was brief but electric, her fingertips tingling as she pulled away. "Curious about what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to her lips for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "About this." Sophia's breath caught in her throat, her body thrumming with a mix of fear and desire. She could feel the tension between them, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. "You're not exactly subtle," she said, her voice teasing but laced with something deeper. Ethan smirked, leaning closer slightly. "Neither are you." Sophia's cheeks burned, her heart racing as she realized how exposed she felt. She glanced at the screen where the stepmother and stepson were now locked in a passionate embrace, their bodies pressed together in a way that left little to the imagination. "What if," she began slowly, her voice trembling slightly, "we made this more interactive?" Ethan's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he said nothing, his gaze searching hers for any hint of hesitation. Sophia held his gaze, her body thrumming with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment, the line they were about to cross, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Sophia took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "We could recreate the scene, see what it's like." Ethan's eyes darkened, his breathing quickening as he processed her words. He glanced at the screen, then back at her, his gaze lingering on her lips. "Okay," he said finally, his voice low and hoarse. Sophia's pulse quickened, her body thrumming with a mix of fear and excitement. She reached out, her hand brushing against his again. This time she didn't pull away, her fingers tracing the outline of his palm. Ethan exhaled sharply, his body tensing at the contact. He turned toward her fully, his gaze intense as he studied her face. Sophia's heart raced as she leaned in slightly, her breath mingling with his. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded, her throat tight. "I'm sure." The room felt charged, the air thick with anticipation as Sophia and Ethan sat on the couch, the laptop screen casting a faint flickering glow over their faces. The stepmother on screen, her voice soft, her face flushed with desire, whispered something in her stepson's ear, her fingers running through his hair. The tension was palpable, the moment suspended in time as the camera lingered on their faces, capturing every flicker of emotion. Sophia's heart raced, her body responding instinctively to the raw intimacy on display. She glanced at Ethan, her breath catching as she caught the way his gaze lingered on her, his eyes dark with desire. The heat between them was undeniable, the electricity crackling in the air like a live wire. "Let's start with the dialogue," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. "Make it Real. Ethan nodded, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. Okay. Sophia glanced at the screen, her mind racing as she tried to recall the words. The stepmother's voice echoed in her head, soft and pleading. I've been so lonely, she murmured, her voice low and husky. Ethan's eyes widened, his breathing quickening as he processed her words. He hesitated for a moment, then replied, his voice low and rough. What do you want? Sophia's pulse quickened, her body reacting to the raw emotion in his voice. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Touch me, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan exhaled sharply, his body tensing at the request. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers briefly before trailing up her arm. The contact sent a jolt through her skin tingling as his fingertips grazed her skin. Like this? He asked, his voice hoarse. Sophia nodded, her breath hitching as his hand settled on her shoulder. His touch was tentative at first, but the warmth of his palm against her skin sent a shiver down her spine. The screen flashed to a close-up of the stepson's face, his expression a mix of desire and hesitation. Ethan leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her neck as he whispered, You're beautiful. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, her body thrumming with a mix of fear and excitement. She could feel the weight of the moment, the line they were about to cross, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. The stepmother on screen leaned in, her lips brushing against her stepson's ear. Sophia mirrored the movement, her lips grazing Ethan's neck as she whispered, I've always wanted this. Ethan's breath hitched, his body tensing at her words. His hand tightened on her shoulder briefly before trailing down her arm, his fingers brushing against the curve of her waist. The scene shifted to a slow, deliberate kiss, the stepmother's hands running through her stepson's hair as they pressed closer together. Sophia glanced at Ethan, her heart pounding in her chest as she leaned in slightly. Their lips were inches apart now, the anticipation almost unbearable. Sophia could feel the heat radiating from his body, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. What if we just tried? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he said nothing, his gaze searching hers for any hint of hesitation. Sophia held his gaze, her body thrumming with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment, the line they were about to cross, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. Ethan leaned in slightly, his lips brushing against hers in a tentative, almost hesitant kiss. Sophia's heart raced as she responded instinctively, her lips moving against his in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The kiss deepened, their bodies pressing closer together as the tension between them finally broke. Sophia's hands trailed up Ethan's arms, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. Ethan's breath hitched, his hands settling on her waist as he kissed her back, his movements growing more confident. The heat between them was almost unbearable, the electricity crackling in the air like a live wire. The stepmother on screen leaned back, her fingers trailing over her stepson's chest as she whispered something in his ear. Sophia glanced at the screen, her body responding instinctively to the raw sensuality on display. Your hands, she murmured, her voice low and husky. They feel so good. Ethan nodded, his breath hitching as he processed her words. His hands trailed up her sides, his fingers brushing against the curve of her waist before settling on her hips. Sophia's pulse quickened, her body thrumming with a mix of fear and desire. She reached out, her hands trailing over Ethan's chest, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric of his hoodie. The scene shifted to a slow, deliberate undressing, the stepmother's hands trailing over her stepson's chest as he removed his shirt. Sophia glanced at Ethan, her breath catching as she caught the way his gaze lingered on her, his eyes dark with desire. Can I? She whispered, her fingers hovering at the hem of his hoodie. Ethan nodded, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. Go ahead. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the fabric, lifting it slowly over his head. The cool air of the apartment brushed against his skin, making him shiver slightly as she set the hoodie aside. Her breath hitched as she took in the sight of him, his broad shoulders, the faint trail of hair leading down his stomach. Her fingers reached out instinctively, tracing the lines of his chest as she whispered, "You're perfect." The room was heavy with the scent of arousal, the air thick and electric as their bodies pressed close together, the laptop screen long forgotten. The only sounds were their quickened breaths and the occasional rustle of fabric as they moved against one another, their hands exploring with a mix of curiosity and urgency. A faint tremor ran through her body as she leaned into his touch, his hands warm against her bare skin, fingers trailing over her waist, her hips, her shoulders, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. Her own hands roamed over his chest, tracing the lines of his muscles, feeling the rapid thud of his heartbeat beneath her fingertips. The heat between them was almost unbearable, the electricity crackling in the air like a live wire. Their lips met again, the kiss deeper this time, more urgent. His tongue brushed against hers, sending a shiver down her spine as she responded instinctively, her body arching toward his. The hardness of his arousal pressed against her thigh, and the realization sent a jolt of desire through her. She wanted more, needed more. But the weight of the situation held her back, the unspoken boundaries between them still lingering in the back of her mind. He seemed to sense her hesitation, pulling back slightly, his breath ragged as he searched her face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. A soft nod and a trembling whisper were all she could manage. "Yes." Exhaling sharply, his hands tightened on her waist as he leaned in again, his lips brushing against her neck, teeth grazing her skin. "I've wanted this for so long," he murmured, the words sending a fresh wave of heat through her. Her breath hitched, her body responding instinctively to his words. Hands trailing down his chest, her fingers brushed against the waistband of his jeans, hesitating for a moment as her heart raced. "Can I?" she whispered, barely audible. The nod he gave was almost imperceptible, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "Please." Her hands trembled slightly as she undid the button of his jeans, fingers brushing against the fabric of his boxers. She could feel his arousal beneath the thin material, and the sensation sent a jolt of desire through her. Pushing his jeans down, her breath caught as she took in the sight of him, fully aroused. Her cheeks burned as her hands moved to remove his boxers, fingers brushing against his skin as she pulled them down. A faint gasp escaped her as she took in the sight of him, his length, his hardness, the way his body seemed to tremble with need. Reaching out, her fingers brushed against him tentatively, her touch light but electrifying. His breath hitched, hands tightening on her waist as he exhaled sharply. "You're incredible," he muttered, his voice rough and strained. Her heart raced as her hand moved to grip him, fingers wrapping around his length tentatively. The heat of him against her skin sent a jolt of desire through her, her body responding instinctively to the sensation. His breath quickened, body tensing as he leaned into her touch. Hands moved to her shoulders, fingers gripping her tightly as he exhaled sharply. "This feels amazing," he murmured, his voice low and husky. Her pulse quickened as she leaned in, lips brushing against his neck. "You're so perfect," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His hands trailed down her back, fingers fumbling slightly with the clasp of her bra. "Let me," he said, his voice rough with need. A faint nod was all she could manage as his hands moved to her back, undoing the clasp with trembling fingers. The fabric fell away, and she felt a wave of vulnerability and desire as he took in the sight of her. The sensation sent a jolt of heat through her, her body arching into his touch. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice low and reverent. Her heart raced as his lips trailed down her neck, teeth grazing her skin as he moved to her collarbone. The warmth of his mouth against her skin sent a shiver down her spine, her hands tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. The weight of the moment was almost too much to bear, the line they'd crossed now irrevocably erased. But in the heat of the moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way his hands felt on her body, the way his lips made her skin burn, and the overwhelming need to be close to him. Her breath hitched as his hands moved to her waist, fingers gripping her tightly as he exhaled sharply. I need you, he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. The room was cloaked in a heavy, almost tangible silence, save for the sound of their breathing, quick, shallow, and unsteady. The air felt charged, every inch of space between them vibrating with an intensity that threatened to consume them both. Their bodies were pressed together, skin against skin, heat radiating between them like a furnace. He stood suddenly, pulling her up with him, his hands firm on her waist. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice low and rough, sending a shiver down her spine. She followed him without hesitation, her heart pounding as they moved through the dimly lit apartment to the bedroom. The door clicked shut behind them, and the room felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in around them. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and inviting, but he didn't lead her there immediately. Instead, he turned her to face away from him, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "I want to make this special," he said, his breath warm against her ear. She felt a faint rustle of fabric, and before she could react, something soft and smooth was tied around her eyes. The darkness was disorienting, heightening her other senses. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. But there was no fear, only anticipation. "Trust me," he whispered, his hands moving to her hips, steadying her. She could hear him moving around the room, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, the soft rustle of fabric. Then his hands were on her again, trailing up her arms, his touch light and teasing. Her breath hitched as his fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of her neck, her body responding instinctively to his touch. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice low and reverent. His lips brushed against her neck, teeth grazing her skin in a way that sent shivers down her spine. Her heart raced as his hands moved to her waist, fingers gripping her tightly as he pulled her closer. The hardness of his arousal pressed against her, and the sensation sent a fresh wave of heat through her core. "I've never wanted anyone like this," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His breath hitched, his hands tightening on her waist as he exhaled sharply. "You're all I've thought about," he murmured, his voice low and rough. His lips trailed down her neck, his hands moving to her breasts, thumbs brushing against her nipples in a way that made her gasp. The sensation sent a jolt of heat through her core, her body arching into his touch. Slowly, she felt him guide her backward, his hands firm on her hips as he led her to the bed. The edge of the mattress pressed against the back of her knees, and she lowered herself onto it, the sheets cool against her skin. His hands moved to her thighs, fingers trailing up her legs in a slow, deliberate motion. She could feel the tension in his body, the way he seemed to tremble with need, and it only fueled her own desire. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. He didn't need to be told twice. Slowly he eased himself onto her, his body pressing against hers in a way that made her head spin. The heat of him against her skin was almost unbearable, the electricity crackling in the air like a live wire. His hands moved to her hips, fingers gripping her tightly as he pulled her closer. The hardness of his arousal pressed against her thigh, and the sensation sent a jolt of heat through her. "Tell me what you want," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He exhaled sharply, his hands moving to her wrists, pinning them gently above her head. The silk scarf around her eyes heightened every sensation, the darkness making her feel vulnerable and exposed in the most exhilarating way. His lips found hers again, the kiss deep and consuming, his tongue brushing against hers in a way that made her head spin. The taste of him was intoxicating, warm, slightly bitter, and she couldn't help but melt into him, her body responding instinctively to his touch. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low and rough. She nodded, her breath hitching as she adjusted to the sensation. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He exhaled sharply as he pushed, the sensation overwhelming. Pleasure and pain intertwined in a way that made her head spin. She could feel the tension in his body, the way he seemed to hold himself still as though afraid to hurt her. "You feel amazing," he murmured, his voice raw with emotion. Her breath hitched as his hands moved to her hips, fingers gripping her tightly as he pulled her closer. The pressure inside her built to a crescendo, and with a sharp cry she shattered, her body trembling as the wave of pleasure crashed over her. He followed her over the edge, his rhythm faltering as he found his release, his body tensing as he buried his face in her neck. The room was silent save for their breathing, quick, shallow, and unsteady. As they clung to each other, their bodies still trembling with the aftershocks of their passion. Slowly, he untied the scarf, the light of the room flooding her vision as she blinked up at him. His face was flushed, his eyes dark with a mixture of satisfaction and something deeper, something that made her heart race. He pulled her close, their bodies tangled together in the mess of sheets as they drifted off to sleep. Her head rested on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat lulling her into a deep, contented sleep. In that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way their bodies fit together, the heat between them, and the overwhelming connection they'd created. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, casting a warm, golden glow across the tangled sheets and their entwined bodies. Her head rested lightly on his chest, the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing a soothing lull against her cheek. The memory of the night before lingered in the air, heavy and intoxicating, like the faint scent of sweat and shared warmth that clung to the room. She stirred slightly, her hand brushing against his arm, fingers tracing the curve of his bicep. His skin was warm, the faint sheen of sweat from their earlier passions still present. He shifted in response, his arm tightening around her waist as he pulled her closer, his voice low and groggy with sleep. "Morning," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. She tilted her head up to look at him, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Morning," she replied, her voice still husky from sleep. His eyes were half closed, his dark lashes casting faint shadows on his cheeks. His face was relaxed, the tension from the night before completely gone, replaced by a calm, almost boyish expression. She couldn't help but reach up, her fingers brushing against his jaw, tracing the faint stubble that had begun to grow. "Last night," she began, her voice trailing off as she searched for the right words. He looked down at her, his gaze soft but intense, as though he could see straight through her. "Was incredible," he finished for her, his voice low and rough. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. Instead, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a slow, deliberate kiss. The taste of him was familiar now, warm and slightly sweet, and it sent a faint shiver of desire through her.